Welcome to The Explainer. So you know those massive refinery towers or those towering steel silos you see on the highway? Ever wonder how they don't just crumple under their own weight? Or honestly explode under all that immense pressure? Today we are jumping right into the absolutely high-stakes world of industrial infrastructure design. We're talking about the engineer's ultimate balancing act, pressure vessel design.
Okay, let's dive into this. How do you actually design a massive structure that absolutely won't collapse, costs the absolute minimum to make, and oh yeah, can actually be moved and installed in the real world? Like, this isn't just some abstract math problem on a chalkboard, right? In pressure vessel engineering, getting this wrong means catastrophic, literally life-or-death failure. But getting it right, that means saving millions of dollars in fabrication, materials, and shipping.
To understand how engineers actually pull this off, we're going to walk through the whole design arc. We'll start with the pressure vessel challenge and the physics of buckling, then look at optimizing vessel proportions, estimating real-world weights, and finally, wrap it up with the final engineering balance.
All right, part 2, the physics of buckling, where safety comes first.
So, before we can even think about saving a few bucks on materials or logistics, we absolutely have to make sure our towering metal cylinder actually stays standing under all these massive loads. Let's clarify what failure actually looks like here, because long, thin cylinders fail very differently than short, thick ones. Buckling is this localized failure or instability under a compressive load. Collapsed, on the other hand, is a general failure of the entire cross-section. It just flattens out due to external pressure. Think about crushing an empty soda can in your hand. When you push down on the top, it doesn't just slowly squish, right? The thin wall is suddenly snap and fold inward. That visceral, sudden instability, that's elastic buckling. And the crazy thing is, it happens well before the metal actually reaches its ultimate compressive strength.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what we're talking about. Look at this comparison of critical stress to the slenderness ratio. Over on the left, in the shaded area, you've got your short and intermediate columns. They fail by simply yielding. The material literally crushes under pure compression. But watch what happens as you move to the right into long column territory. That line drops off a cliff. These long, thin-walled structures cross into the highly dangerous zone of elastic buckling. Here, failure is dictated by the slenderness and geometry of the cylinder, not just the raw strength of the steel itself. It's a whole different ballgame.
Now here is where the physics gets a bit counterintuitive. You'd probably assume that any pressure acting on a vessel is bad news, right? But it entirely depends on the direction. Internal pressure actually helps. No, really, it pushes back out against the walls, creating this longitudinal stress that subtracts from the downward compressive weight. It essentially stiffens the vessel against those axial loads. It's kind of like a highly inflated balloon holding up a heavy book. Conversely, external pressure is the absolute enemy. It adds to the compressive forces, squeezing the cylinder inward and actively helping the buckling process along.
Moving on to part 3, optimizing vessel proportions. Let's talk about the geometry of cost. Okay, so once our vessel is mathematically proven to be safe from buckling, the engineer's job immediately shifts to figuring out how to make this massive thing economically viable. Which brings us to this fascinating geometry paradox. If a perfect sphere contains the maximum possible volume using the absolute least amount of surface area, meaning the least amount of expensive metal, why on earth do we constantly build long cylinders instead of giant metal spheres? Well, while spheres are mathematically perfect on paper, they are vastly more expensive and complex to actually fabricate in the real world. You really only see spheres for extremely large volumes or specific high-pressure applications where you literally have no other choice. For everything else, the cylinder is king. But exactly how long and how wide should that cylinder be?
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the clear trend in finding those perfect cylinder proportions. Engineers use what's called a length to diameter, or L/D ratio. For a standard atmospheric tank with zero internal pressure, the optimal ratio is just 1. But look at what happens as the internal pressure ramps up. From 0 to 250 pounds per square inch, the optimum ratio jumps to 3. Above 500 psi, it stretches all the way out to 5. So as the internal pressure goes up, engineers are essentially forced to stretch the vessel longer and thinner to find that economic Goldilocks zone, perfectly balancing the required thickness of the steel against the total volume they need.
And, it's not just the main cylinder body we have to worry about. The ends matter immensely, too. These complex mathematical shape decisions change drastically depending on what the vessel actually does. A simple atmospheric drum, that might just need flat ends. But the second you add pressurized contents, you suddenly have to calculate volumes and proportions for ellipsoidal, hemispherical, or even conical heads.
Every single curve you see is a highly calculated trade-off between volume, structural integrity, and manufacturing cost.
Which brings us to part 4, estimating real-world weights. This is where paper meets physics.
So this is where our perfectly proportioned, mathematically sound paper design gets dragged kicking and screaming into the grueling physical reality of the industrial world. To ensure this thing survives being fabricated, shipped down the highway, and hoisted by cranes, an engineer can't just calculate one overall weight. They actually have to calculate 6 distinct types of weight. You've got the fabricated weight straight out of the shop, then shipping weight, which includes the transport saddles. Erection weight adds ladders, platforms, and insulation for the cranes to actually lift the thing. Empty weight is just the vessel sitting on its foundation. Operating weight is when it's fully dressed and filled with liquid product. And finally, test weight, when it's filled to the absolute brim with heavy water for safety checks. Honestly, miscalculating just one of these, say the operating weight, could literally crack the concrete foundation the very second the client turns the machine on.
But how do you even calculate the exact weight of raw steel when the steel itself actually changes shape during manufacturing? Check out this surprising number, 1.5 inches. That is how much a thick piece of steel plate can thin out during the cold working process. When a massive steel head is spun and formed into that ellipsoidal shape we looked at a minute ago, the knuckle, that curved edge, stretches and gets thinner. It can sometimes lose up to 1.5 inches of its original material thickness. Wild, right?
The crucial thing to remember here is that solid metal doesn't just disappear during manufacturing. It flows. It moves to the areas of most work. And because of this extreme stretching, engineers can't just order the exact thickness they need on paper. Actually, scratch that. They legally can't. They are forced to calculate, order, and pay for plate overage up front. This is a vital safety margin of extra metal added by the mill to guarantee that, even after the metal stretches and flows, the thinnest point still meets those absolute minimum safety requirements to prevent that catastrophic buckling we discussed at the start.
Let's move on and see how this all builds up. Because once the base metal is calculated, we have to account for all the extras, the nozzles, the supports, and literally the weight of the welding material itself. And the sheer scale of the vessel dictates a sliding scale of extra weight percentages just for this stuff. For a vessel under 50,000 pounds, you add a flat 10% to your calculation just to cover welds and miscellaneous components. But as the vessel scales up past 100,000 pounds, that allowance drops to 5%. It is a meticulous, almost obsessive accounting of every single ounce of material.
All right, part 5, the final engineering balance. Time to synthesize the data.
This is where all 3 of our acts finally come together, and the structural engineer's delicate balancing act is fully realized. So the crucial point is summarized perfectly by this quote straight from the Source Engineering Manual. Determining the lowest weight is probably the best parameter in achieving the lowest cost. You see, weight isn't just a number you need to hand off to the crane operator or the shipping company. In the massive scale of industrial design, weight is the ultimate proxy for economic efficiency. Less weight means less steel, smaller concrete foundations, cheaper shipping, and faster installation, all while rigorously ensuring the vessel has the exact right proportions to safely resist buckling under pressure. It's all connected. So, the next time you drive past a sprawling refinery or gaze up at a towering industrial silo, I really want you to ask yourself, what invisible forces is that thing perfectly balanced to survive? What complex mathematical dance of internal pressure, critical stress, stretch geometry, and calculated plate overage is keeping that giant steel cylinder standing tall against gravity and the forces of nature? Because it's never just a giant metal tube. It is a literal masterpiece of applied physics and economic geometry. Thanks so much for exploring this explainer with me, and hey, keep looking up.